In this video, I'm going to talk about the difference between weighted and unweighted tuning forks. In the introduction video, I briefly touched upon the fact that we use unweighted tuning forks for VCT, and primarily we use entire sets or a set up to 5 tuning forks. There's going to be another video that talks specifically about the sets. For example, we use a chakra set that is 7 tuning forks, but we really only use the first 5. And when we use our tuning fork sets, we don't use them necessarily in the same manner or for the same reasons that the sets are sold. For example, chakra set would be more towards maybe a chakra balancing, or the brain tuner sets, which we do kind of use that towards what it was designed for. But it's really the frequency range of, let's say, 100 hertz to about 250 hertz, and that's the really the center sensitivity range for the vibration sensors that we target within VCT. So I wanted to go back and talk more specifically about weighted tuning forks, unweighted tuning forks, in case you have never seen tuning forks before and this is your first time working with them. I do want to talk about them briefly. So what I have in my hand here is a weighted tuning fork. The frequency stated on it is 136.1 hertz. And the weighted tuning forks, they obviously have weights, and they are permanently set at the manufacturer when they dial them into that particular frequency that's stamped on the tuning fork, that those weights are at some preset location along that tine, and then they have a little set screw that kind of locks that in. And just so you can see the contrast here, what I have in my hand is the same 136.1 hertz. It's part of the chakra set from Omnibus. So it's the same exact frequency, and if you can notice, the tines are much different between the two. So it gives you an indicator of what the weights on the weighted tuning fork can do for this tuning fork. Now, they're supposed to be providing the same frequency in the air. If I strike them right now, these tines around the weighted tuning fork are going to vibrate at the same cycles per second as if I struck the tines on this tuning fork. And if I held them up to both of my ears, I would be able to hear the same tone. Now, the difference in the way that they're constructed is that the weights on this particular tuning fork is designed to make sure that most of the vibration runs down the tuning fork rather than out this way. And I'm going to get more detail on that concept of the way the sound travels away from the tuning fork. So it's designed to force most of the vibration down the tines and into the base, because this is a tuning fork that we would put right on your skin and press down. It's more of a physical related tuning fork. It was originally designed, or at one point it was designed and sold as a medical device that doctors would have in their practice, and they would do certain things, certain diagnostic things, either nerve damage for neuropathy, nerve damage, hearing, broken bones, those sorts of things. So it's designed to actually have an interaction with the tissue of your body, or the bone of your body. And then the unweighted tuning forks, they were originally designed so that we had more of that noise coming into our ears so that we would do a comparison. For example, if I was going to use this tuning fork to tune an instrument, I would want to calibrate that a certain note on that instrument to the sound that I was hearing here. So I would strike this tuning fork, and I would be listening to the same tone or the same pitch as I'm adjusting that instrument, so that both of those sounds will match each other. It's really kind of the same concept as what we're doing in chronotherapy using vibration. Is we're doing the same sort of thing to your body. A lot of times in sound healing, we call it tuning the body, and this is really, in fact, what we're doing. The things that can be tuned in the body really is the timing circuits, the timing systems within our body. And we're going to show you a way in which you can do that. So one of the things about the weighted tuning fork is that I did talk about the fact that the weights are moving the vibration down, but it is also a factor of, if we consider this thing just to be a big old bar of metal, and we have something vibrating on this end with the weights, it really throws off the whole balance of this tuning fork, and it's supposed to be that way. So the weights are not only just moving the vibration this way towards the stem, but then the whole thing is flexing. This end down here flexes quite a bit, and it makes this end flex as well. And a lot of research and study has been done on tuning forks when it comes to the physics and engineering behind physics of metal. Let's say that you're going to be an engineer for a bridge, and you want to know how certain metal flexes when it vibrates. Even the study of singing bowls was really important to people that were dealing with pipes and cylinders and the rings that put pipes together so that vibration could do something, possibly spring a leak in a piping system. So the same concepts for here with the tuning forks, they're really dealt with as a piece of metal that flexes and vibrates. So there's been a lot of research studies that have shown how these tuning forks will have several different vibrations in the flexing itself. So it's not always just about the frequency of this tuning fork, especially when it comes to the unweighted, because there's so much flexing involved in here. So what that ends up doing is making the base of this tuning fork flex, not just from the vibrations of the tines moving up and down, but also from the entire flexing of this whole end, making this end flex. There's actually a fulcrum point about halfway up, about right here, and because it's unbalanced like this, that makes this end move in about maybe 15 different directions, and then we end up dampening part of that vibration just by holding on to the stem. So we're really left with about 3 or 4 main vibrations that are happening down here in the stem. A lot of it has to do with the weights on the end of it. And if I take the same exact frequency with a weighted tuning fork or an unweighted tuning fork, you can see that they had to extend the tines out quite a bit to get that same frequency. And there's no weights on there, so the fulcrum point might be different, but there's still an unweighted part to this. We're not so concerned about the vibrations that are coming out of the stem, and we're more concerned about the vibration coming out of the tines themselves, because we're striking this and it's traveling through the air. Actually, you got to consider the way that these tines are moving towards each other, back and forth. And when I strike one of these tines, it's going to bend inwards and then swing outwards, which is going to cause the other tine to do the same thing. The amount of times the tines move back and forth in one entire cycle. For example, this tine here moves inwards as far as it can go. Then it swings outwards because it's on a fork. So that bending outwards, and then when it gets all the way back to the same exact position, that would be one cycle. And in this particular tuning fork, it can do 136.1 cycles within a second, and that's what gives us our frequency, or in other words, cycles per second, or hertz. So in an unweighted tuning fork, and why this is important to you for vibrational healing, you want to understand the mechanisms for mechanical energy and the fact that these tines are moving air molecules. They're pushing on air molecules. Being a part of mechanical energy and moving air molecules, it's not generating electricity, and it's not generating any electromagnetic fields. And that's one of the misconceptions that happens quite often in sound healing, is the fact that this is nothing more than metal. It's not even a magnetic type of metal. So you have to consider the fact that what mechanical energy is the air molecules being compressed. As this time comes this way, it's going to start pushing on these air molecules, and these air molecules are going to press on the next one next to it, kind of like a bunch of pool balls or balls that collide with each other that are just sitting there. So as these things start to progress and hit each other, there's this wave of compressed or molecules of air being colliding with each other and moving out away from the source. So the main way that an unweighted tuning fork vibration moves away from these tines is usually in a direction like this, and it kind of spreads out. And then, of course, you're going to have some vibration moving out of the other tine itself. So what I'm going to do is change this screen, and we're going to take a look at, I have a picture here of weighted and unweighted sitting next to each other. And then what you're seeing on the screen is an artist rendition. You have unweighted on the left-hand side, you have weighted on the right-hand side. So these little bubbles that are coming off of them are representing the amount of sound volume out of them. So if you're in that purple bubble, that would on the left-hand side, the purple area would represent if your ear or a sensor was within that area or within that bubble, they would hear that sound quite well. And it looks like it's only maybe 6 inches, 8 inches away. You know that sound travels in a tuning fork a lot more than that. So, you know, the scaling here is not as important as it is to compare the difference between the weighted and unweighted tuning forks. So what it's showing you on the left-hand side is that most of the vibration, the force of the vibration is being moved out at the same direction as where the tines are moving back and forth. And then you see a little green bubble that's kind of coming towards you, and that's off of the perpendicular end of the tuning fork. And if you look down, back down at the picture of me, it's really talking about if you were to turn your tuning fork on its side where it's perpendicular to the movement of the tuning forks, it's moving it out this way. Or as if you're seeing in the picture, it's coming out towards you. And then you see a little bit of the unweighted tuning fork has some vibrations coming out of the stem, and that's just because that also, an unweighted tuning fork still has an unbalanced load to it. So there is some flexing of that stem, but what I would recommend to you is based off of the difference in the mechanical construction of these tuning forks, I would always go for the weighted tuning forks for on the body work and unweighted tuning forks for using it in the air like we're doing. You can possibly use one or the other and swap them out, but they both have their advantages, so why not use them to where they were designed. On the right hand side, you're seeing the weighted tuning forks. If you notice the difference in comparison, again, these things are not to scale. They were just an artist rendition that we did in a 3D program. And on the right hand side, those weights, it's the same thing. The direction that the weights are moving, it's very hard to hear a tuning fork, a weighted tuning fork. When you strike it, you really have to be pretty close. You have to hold it up to your ear to even hear the vibration that are coming out of the weights. And so this is just showing you the difference between using an unweighted tuning fork for things in the air and focusing on the way that the tines are held maybe near your ear or near the skin, and that in an unweighted tuning fork, most of the vibration, the force of the vibration is coming off of the tines themselves, as opposed to a weighted tuning fork where you get a lot more vibration coming out of the stem itself, just based off of the design of the tuning forks. If you look at the next picture, this is looking down on the top view of those tuning forks. Again, the left-hand side is the unweighted tuning fork, and it gives you another view of The fact that the direction the tines are moving, that's those purple bubbles, and then perpendicular, that's the green area. So it really does matter, especially when you're doing VCT with these unweighted tuning forks. You want to make sure that you're holding them in the right orientation so that the way that the tines are moving is pushing more air, stronger, higher intensity. You want to have them oriented in the correct area. You know, you're probably still going to get some usefulness if you're holding them perpendicular to the skin in those little green bubbles, but you're more likely to get more results if you're holding them to where it's where the tuning forks, the tines themselves, are pushing air in the direction where you want the vibrations to go. And then over on the right hand side is the weighted tuning fork, and it's just showing you that, again, using a weighted tuning fork for the purposes like we do in VCT, it's probably better to go with an unweighted tuning fork. Now, there are different sizes of weighted tuning forks. If you look here, I have the 136.1 and I have a 64 hertz tuning fork, and you see how those tines get really big like this with the 64 hertz. So this is showing you that 136 down to 64, that the higher the lower the frequency, the longer that stem has to be, so that now when I strike this thing, the tuning fork tines are moving a lot slower to get 64 full cycles in a tine within a second. So it just shows you the difference in how they're constructed. It's the same thing with tuning forks, with unweighted tuning forks. Here I have that 136 hertz tuning fork, or 136.1, and this is 963 hertz. You can see that as I go from more than doubling, 963 hertz, you can see how far down they had to go in the tine length on this tuning fork to get to the higher frequencies. And the challenge that you're going to have here is the way the ability for this tuning fork to actually bend the tines to get the same amount of force that the vibrations would be coming off of this tuning fork. You can see, or hopefully you can see, that this one very thin piece of metal right here has to be able to swing quite nicely, and it's probably a lot easier the longer and the thinner that these tines are, the much better it is going to be moving back and forth. And the more intensity that these tines move back and forth, the volume goes up quite a bit, which is why you can hear these with your ear a lot more than you can with the weighted tuning forks. So we prefer tuning forks within the range. This is right within our range, between 100 and 250. And if we go up to, here's one that's at 210 hertz. It's still very reasonable at 210 to have tines that are long enough, that have a nice good flexion to it. And I could still strike this and have it flex back and forth, and we're still pushing air molecules quite well, quite conveniently. When it comes to mechanical energy, here's another way to look at the molecules of air. And by molecule, I mean 78% of the air molecules are oxygen and nitrogen. And let's say that these are oxygen molecules, these balls right here. So when oxygen molecules are in the air, yes, we say that everything vibrates, and that's true. Let's say that this ball is just kind of hanging out in the air, and it's an oxygen molecule, and it is vibrating around like this. And then there's one that's kind of next to it, and we know that the density, or the compacting, the molecules of air are not as close to each other as molecules of oxygen would be within water. Within water, these things would be much closer to each other. just based off of the density, and that does have a lot to do with the way that sound travels, and then what happens when sound reaches different layers of density. That's pretty important in our work of vibrational therapy. So let's say that both of these are oxygen molecules in the air, and for mechanical energy, the physics behind mechanical energy is really about Newton's laws of motion, and the fact that when molecules like these collide with each other, they're really maintaining their spot in space. So let's do it this way. If this tuning fork was right here and it was struck, first thing it's going to do is hit the next molecule of air next to it. And let's say that's this molecule right here. So it's striking that molecule, and of course these aren't to scale. It strikes that first molecule there, and that first molecule gets excited and gets pushed basically out of its normal vibration range. Let's say it's vibrating just like this. And then it's going to be pushed this way a little bit more, and it's going to strike the next one that's just kind of hanging out and vibrating. So it's going to strike it just like a pool ball would strike. Then it's going to strike this one, and this one's going to now be knocked out of its normal vibration, but eventually it's going to hit the next one next to it. And this is really what happens with vibration in mechanical vibration. It's all about molecules striking each other, and then that one striking each other. If you've ever saw a Newton's cradle, you have those I think there's five of those metal balls that are hanging on strings, and you grab one and that strikes and it moves that vibration all the way through and makes the last one swing up and back. So that Newton's cradle is showing you the same thing that's happening to mechanical energy, and it's very important to understand the concepts of mechanical energy, because that is sound vibration. When we're using sound-based items like this, it's mechanical energy, which is different from electrical energy and electromagnetic energy. In fact, those two deal with completely different laws of physics, and it's important for you to understand that. So let me move this window back down. So what we're dealing with in the body itself, I've briefly talked about in the introduction about the fact that we're really targeting the things in the body that matter as far as vibration is involved. So the two main ways that we do vibrational chronotherapy is through body sensors that are specifically designed for not only touch, which vibration that the last molecule of air that gets compressed or moved and shoved up against the first cell of our skin, which would be probably one of the hairs of our skin if it was hairy skin, or that first epithelial layer there in our skin, or epidermis, would be the first cell that gets vibrated or compressed. So there is some compression happening there, but it's not the same compression that we would have in maybe a physiotherapy where we're putting our hands on someone. So sometimes there's the talk about cellular resonance, and how our vibration that's coming in through sound healing methodologies, that those vibrations are getting all the way into every cell, and every cell has a resonance. And inside that cell, if let's say this ball is representing a cell, that when vibration hits that cell, that inside of it, everything on the inside of it is now vibrating at the rate that it needs to, because it's in training with the tuning fork that's over here. That's not necessarily, it's considered the cell resonance theory, and that's not necessarily what we're seeing that's happening with the tuning forks and vibration. Every cell does have a resonance capability, that if it's vibrating at a specific resonant frequency, then it's most likely healthy, or it's as healthy as it can be. But then the resonant frequency actually changes depending on what it's doing at the time. We went into the books to really learn how cells work, And not all cells, first of all, can be entrained to stay at, let's say, this tuning fork when this vibration reaches a cell anywhere in my body where this is located. The ability for this tuning fork to set the resonant frequency of this cell, it's very difficult to do, because this cell, as soon as you remove the tuning fork from the equation, that cell is going to go back to doing what it needs to do right now. And most of our cells sometimes are in emergency situations. And most cells have feelers on the outside of them that are looking for certain inputs. And the vibration of what's happening in the cell is usually based off of the inputs to the cell itself. And that may not be vibration. So we don't necessarily look at a cell resonant theory to consider that all cells work in the same way and all cells need very specific set frequencies. What we're looking at is that not all cells themselves, that some cells are really triggered off of certain events. And if we look at this neuron, the cell body of the neuron is, you can see it indicated there. That's usually called, that's also referred to as the soma, the cell body. And the resonant frequency of a cell body, we're really more concerned with what causes an impulse spike to be sent down that axon. So that neuron is going to fire, which would be firing at a very specific rate. And it's going to fire at a specific rate, not necessarily off of the resonant frequency of that cell body, but off of the things that are coming in from those dendrites, or in the case of sensors, body sensors, like what we're going to talk about with our Pacinian corpuscles that are looking for vibration, or in the cochlear inner ear where it has hairs, or in our eardrum that is vibrating based off of vibrations coming into our ear. We have to look beyond just the cell itself. The neuron has certain frequencies of impulse, either from the cell body, or we have impulses coming across synapses, which happen at very specific times. We're going to have sensor receptor endings onto the end of those axons when we have sensory things coming in, like the vibration sensors that we're going to talk about in VCT. They're coming in from the very, very ends of these axons here. And they're designed to, in a very specific way, for vibration to understand pressure and touch and other things like heat and pain and pain and things like that, position in space. So the vibration that's going to come into your body from a vibrotactile or a vibration sensor is not a cell, and that's what I want to show you in this picture. That the neuron that is bringing in vibrations so that our brain can know, hey, there's a vibration in this part of our body. And really at the core of VCT is the fact that the actual cell of the neuron is not vibrating at a very specific frequency that you're introducing. It's the sensor on the end of that neuron cell. So it's not the cell itself. So there's a difference in the concept in how we look at the body. It's mechanisms within a cellular process, and it's receptor based, which really has to do with energy being used as communication. Molecules that are vibrating and moving mechanical energy and propagating and moving along a certain distance is a form of communication. And understanding the different forms of communication is pretty important in understanding mechanical energy and understanding what's happening within VCT.